Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and welcome to the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes, and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode.
On last week's podcast, I had a fascinating conversation with Carrie Baskins, who is the CEO of Peak Toolworks. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, I highly recommend it. Carrie has developed a specialty for taking struggling companies and transforming them into a profitable and value-creating entity. He put all his tools and techniques together and created an amazing transformation toolbox. Last week, we discussed some of the broad highlights of this toolbox. This week, Carrie is back for part 2 of our discussion, and we also have with us his longtime business partner, Julie Schell, president of Change Management Partners, Inc. Julie is an expert on the people side of transforming struggling companies, and this is what we're going to discuss in depth today. But first, I want to tell you just a little bit about Julie. Julie is dedicated to strengthening the capabilities of both individuals and organizations so they can meet business challenges and deliver results as they close the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Julie's specialties include executive coaching, strategic planning, change management, leadership development, team building, and workshop program development. Julie's 21 years at the General Motors Corporation informed and leveraged her abilities to strategize and implement change. Beginning as a facilitator of value engineering workshops, Julie was tapped to manage total quality management for engineering, manufacturing, and quality to drive alignment and a shared purpose around customer excellence. In the last podcast episode, Carrie talked to us about some of the core elements of any business culture: common tools, techniques, behaviors, and language. He also mentioned the importance of creating a safe environment. Julie believes that top leaders need to create a process where all the team members have an opportunity to learn while becoming a high-performing team. She also believes that the top leader must hold himself or herself accountable for building high-performing teams and creating processes that allow people to be excellent every single day. Julie and Carrie are going to share with us exactly how building high-performing leaders and high-performing teams fits into this incredible transformation toolbox and how it helps struggling companies become value-creating and profitable. We have a lot to talk about, and I'm really excited, so let's get started. I'm so happy to welcome to the podcast Carrie and Julie. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, it's great to have both of you here. I'm so excited. You guys have a long history together and have worked together, so I'm excited to hear some of this bantering back and forth. But before we begin our discussion, I want to start with Julie. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background and explain why you are an expert on building leaders and high-performing teams?
I call my company Change Management Partners because my overall theme is to partner with an individual or a team or a company to help them be capable of managing change. I think my job is to get into a company, help them do what they need to do, and get out. I don't like to stay too long because it would mean I'm not doing my job. So in my previous life at General Motors, I did workshops all the time, like value engineering, lean manufacturing, Kaizens, all of those kinds of workshops. But I would get so frustrated because we do so much and we'd have all this work done hanging on the wall, and then trying to get stuff done, the work stayed on the wall. There was so much resistance to change. No matter how good an idea was, leaders would resist for a lot of reasons. You know, the insinuation that we weren't doing it right in the first place, that whole phrase, work smarter. It just made people feel like, oh, I was, an idiot till you showed up, right? And then people truly didn't understand the value of making the change, or they didn't have to, or they were waiting for the next program to come along. I've always been a student of Deming. He said that the improvement business is the people business. So what I've done is combine all the technical skills around lean manufacturing, production systems, 80-20, with all the skills on how to get people to work together, kind of doing a what, so what, now what approach that makes sure it engages the minds and hearts of everybody involved. Change Management Partners is all about helping build the teams and providing the training and helping with the individual coaching to help companies be more profitable as soon as they can be.
That's certainly important. You don't want to waste any time when it comes to that. And I think company culture is such an important thing. I hear about this at every facility I go to. It's the people part that's the hardest part. And I'm wondering, Carrie, if you can explain how you and Julie got together. You talked about it a little bit last week, but talk about that a little bit and how her teachings work together with your approach for how you transform struggling companies.
Sure. Well, Julie and I go way back, and quite frankly, I had not really been in a position to lead people until about the time I met Julie, which was in the year 2000 when she was brought in to work with a large industrial distributor here in Kansas City. We were just forming really the first executive leadership team of this organization. And one of the very first things I learned from Julie that has resonated with me through my whole career is I think we sat down, and within the first 5 minutes, she had a message for all of us as leaders. And she said, you all need to first understand this is not about you. If you really kind of take a look at leaders everywhere from business all the way through politics, it always seems to be about the leader and not about the task or about the people. So from the not about you conversation led to a conversation about the difference in leading a business versus running a business. When we can get ourselves to a point where our employees are so aligned, so engaged, their toolboxes are so well understood, and the leader can then step back and be a leader, you now have a business that runs without the leader and you have very high engagement.
Yeah, Julie, I'm interested in that. Once you know that the leader buys into that, how does that come to the surface? How does this idea that it's not about the leader, it's about the other people, right? The other people in the company.
I like to say that there's no such thing as leadership. There's only followership. And so then it becomes the job of a leader to get people to follow them. And if you think about it, there are a lot of leaders, and I'm sure you've worked with them at some point in time, who have no more idea than the man in the moon about how to get people to engage and to work together in order to make things happen. And so to Carrie's point, it's all about creating that team, creating the folks that are aligned and will work together to make something happen. So when we focus on leading, that's like, oh, look at me over here, let's do this. Well, you lead through followership by always saying, wait, who's behind me? And would they be behind me if I wasn't in the room? And that's a trick.
Oh, sure. I can see that. I'm interested to know from both of you, start with Julie and then Carrie come in, but what are some of the qualities you look for in this type of leadership? And what kind of followers are you looking for?
In looking for folks, I look for people with a passion to do work. So I'll just start with people like Carrie. Carrie knows what he's doing. Carrie knows how to get an organization to work together. And when I first met him, he was in sales, and I knew that he could rally his troops. And I knew that he had a passion for the business. But most importantly, Carrie was open to listening to support and being a learner. Like Sengi talks about being a learner versus a knower. There are people in leadership positions who think they know everything and they just want to keep going. But then there are learners, and the learners are like, wait, what? What happened there? And they're open to feedback, and they're open to suggestions, and they're open to learn. That is my number one key criteria on who I want to work with.
But Julie, is that organic? Are you born with that, or can you learn to be that kind of learning leader?
I think you can learn how to be a learning leader. And the thing is, what I'll try to do is if some people aren't born with really strong leadership, I can give them some tools and techniques. And what I find, you can either think your way to a new way of acting or act your way to a new way of thinking. So if I can teach them to act a certain way and they keep doing it, then they change their thoughts about how they should be working. But they often just need help to show them they just don't know what they don't know.
Well, Carrie, what do you think makes you a good leader, aside from what Julie thinks makes you a good leader?
You mean aside from Julie, what makes me a good leader? Not much.
You think Julie's the key to that?
I think Carrie is a perfect example of somebody who has a passion but is so open to going, what else can I do? Is there something else I can do to help move my folks forward? And that's why it's a pleasure to engage with conversations with him. And then it just becomes, what did we learn today? What else do we need? And so on.
So, okay, Carrie, I'll ask you the question a little bit differently. How can you be a better leader?
How could I be a better leader, or could a person be a better leader?
Okay, take that approach.
You had asked the question about, can you learn to be a leader? And if you start out and you're just not that person, can you learn? And one of the additional strong teachings that I received from Julie is this notion that you can't put into somebody what God left out. And we use that term from the standpoint that some leadership roles might require a certain type of a dynamic in a person's personality and approach that isn't the right fit for somebody, which does not necessarily mean they're a poor leader. It means in this particular instance, they're a poor fit. And so we could have a whole podcast conversation about getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. Mm-hmm. But if we just kind of walk this conversation back for a second to what we look for in leadership, I said, last week on that podcast that competency and kindness are two real powerful constants. Because first of all, your resume can demonstrate your competency, because once you get to a leadership level, especially at the director or vice president or running a business level, you've got a resume that lines up that kind of got you there. You've got some real numbers behind how you accomplished your movements through your career. And that's great. But then always call out kindness, if you will, because that is about followership. The only possible way that you can be a leader is if you can stop, turn around, and realize that there's people behind you. But that comes with a big caveat. Julie and I, in the maybe hundreds, if not thousands of conversations we've had in the last 20 years, we've watched a lot of leaders in all the organizations that I've been a part of. And we made the conclusion at either end, you could say a horrible, evil person like Adolf Hitler or someone like Jesus or Gandhi at the other end. Mm-hmm. They both demonstrate leadership and the ability to get a followership. But one is a healthy followership and one is not. And every leader's in between. And so for me, when I pick a leader, when I start talking about the kindness, what I'm really looking for, what is the demonstrated health of the following that you've been able to earn so that you can actually call yourself a leader? And I dive really deep into understanding that in the interview process.
And if I can add on to that, it's about Carrie asking his leaders, how are you guys doing that? If Carrie as a leader didn't ask his first team of leaders, how are you demonstrating, whether it's the competence and the team building or the team focus or the follower focus, if you will, the more Carrie asks about that, the more people will believe that it's true. Because there are leaders who declare at day one, yes, we are going to build teams and we are going to build a great culture. And then you never hear it again, unless they put it on a poster on the wall. I love management by poster. But one of the things that Carrie does and good leaders do is constantly ask their folks about how are they doing with demonstrating with their team all these qualities.
Really interesting. Last week, Carrie really talked about some of the tools in his toolbox for developing these struggling companies and helping to transform them. And this is really the basis of what we're talking about here. So, Julie, I'm really interested in how you begin the process of developing the people side of things. So can you just in general explain for us your basic approach and the concepts of this?
Well, first of all, I really, truly believe, and I try to demonstrate this, I recognize that people are doing the best they can with what they know. And so when I start coming in and working with a group of folks, I really want to demonstrate my competence and my kindness. I'm always grateful when someone brings me in because they recognize that it helps to have help from the outside. I love the quote, surgeons don't perform their own surgery. So if I'm invited in to come and work with someone, I start with, you all are doing the best you can. So well done you. And we talk about what they've done well. And then we talk about, well, what would you like to do? So I keep everything in their court on, what were some of the frustrations? And then I get them to expose what they do well and where their frustrations are. Now they have a gap that they are basically inviting me into. That's very important. And then the thing that I recognize is that you'd never go out on the shop floor and expect people to do their work without tools and techniques and processes. But for some reason, we expect people to solve problems, build relationships, communicate really well, but we don't give them any tools to do this. And so it's so unfair to blame the people who aren't doing those folks well. So I like to focus on what inputs do these folks need in order to make the output of being able to build a safe environment where we can have conflict, we can resolve it, and so on. One of my basic tools is a triangle that demonstrates 80-20. Now, so many folks who listen to this are very familiar with 80-20 with regards to what customers do we work with, what products do we work on. But the same thing applies to work in general. Only 20% of the top of the triangle is about the actual work. 80% is about the bottom of the triangle, which is how are we working together? Are we communicating and so on? You can test that because a lot of times I'll say that and people go, oh no, 80% is not how we're working together. Well, I could ask anybody listening to this podcast, what project went in the ditch recently and why did it? And I will do this exercise in a room and people will list all kinds of reasons that the project fails, but they will always have, we didn't communicate. Some people didn't have the information they needed. We didn't have the right people making decisions. I mean, it was a high technical decision and I've got the boss of that person's boss who knows nothing about it making a decision. So you see, it's not about the actual project. It's about how we're making that work. And so just a simple triangle with 80% open at the bottom going, oh. And a lot of times it's me because I put me on one side of the bottom of the triangle and you or any department on the other side. And I realize I have designed failure into my projects by not having the right people in the room, by not having good relationships with those folks. I use other tools like a lighthouse. All the tools I use are very simple. Triangle. The next one I use is a lighthouse. So the job of the top leader or the top leader team is to be in the top of the lighthouse and be scanning horizon for, hey, what's coming down the pike? What's happening? But the job is not to come down and pull boats off the rocks. But you've got leaders who are constantly running down and pulling boats off the rocks, but that's not their job. They like to rescue people and it makes them feel good. And their intent is to make things better. But the impact is the message that the organization is not capable without me as leader, which goes back to Carrie's original point. If I'm focusing on me as leader, I'm not focusing on the impact that has in the organization. The job of the leader and the leader team is to develop the team under them so that they can be running the lighthouse. And that means helping them build their teams, giving them the capacity to do that, giving them the competencies and the trainings they need. And let me just give you one other tool that works really well. I like to use a Rubik's Cube. That really demonstrates systems thinking. So if you think about it, let's say that somebody in another department does something and it makes their life, oh my God, so much easier. And now I'm doing an extra 2 hours of work every week because they threw it over the wall at me, but they're over there celebrating because they made their lives better. And what I like to talk to leadership teams about is imagine that finance, they're green on the cube, and imagine that quality is blue, and manufacturing, whatever operations, whatever you have, give them a different color and start turning the Rubik's Cube together based on the true north that Carrie talks about all the time. But anytime I turn that cube, I'm impacting everybody else. And the top leader has to have created a team that actually cares about turning the cube together. And that's where followership comes in.
Julie, how do you identify good followers and bad followers? And what do you do about it once you do identify it?
Well, the interesting thing is most people get to a top leadership position by demonstrating leadership behaviors. So when you get to the top of an organization, you're used to being a leader. So when I'm working at Carrie's level, he's working with a whole bunch of people that are really strong leaders, and they have to balance being that good team player in there, turning that cube together. Some people are followers because they either don't have the competencies or they don't have the courage to, confidence to demonstrate leadership behaviors. And a lot of them, back to Carrie's point, you can't put in what God left out, but some people actually prefer to be told what to do. And it's being very aware that there are people who just enjoy that. Okay, give them a job on the right seat on the bus where they're doing what they're told to do and they'll be happy. But there are people that we can develop into stronger leaders by giving them the tools and techniques in order to do that. And I just watch for how do people grow in that learning space.
You said earlier, Julie, that you go into an organization and you start this idea of changing the culture with the people in mind. And you said you don't want to stay long.
No.
So how do you know when it's starting to work, and how do you know when it's time to get out of there?
I just use my intuition. And sometimes getting out of there means moving to another level of the organization to work. So for example, in a number of companies I work with, they're top companies, and I'll start working at the very top. And then, then the manufacturing dude wants to do a culture change and leadership within his organization. And then finance wants to do it. And you see what I'm saying? And then there are pockets of people. So I might not get out of the company entirely, but I like to get away from that team and see if they can stabilize without me, and then go back in a couple months later and go, hey guys, how's it going? What's working? What's not working? Because I've already given them the tools to do that. And then just sometimes by me showing up reminds them, oh gosh, we stopped doing that. Now we need to do it again.
That's right. That makes perfect sense. So, Carrie, I want to bring you into this part of the conversation. So you're working in an organization and you're implementing your transformation toolbox, right? And then you bring in someone like Julie. What happens next? You've laid out your true north. We talked a lot about that last week. You've laid out, the goals of the organization, your one-page business plan. How do you mesh this people side of things with what you're doing, and how does Julie fit into that?
Where Julie has really helped, well, she's helped in a lot of ways, but one of the ways that we operate is to get everybody in a common language. She does a lot of work in what we call new leader assimilation or new leader onboarding. And what that does, especially if we're all kind of kicking off at the CEO level where I'm starting and I'm standing up a new leadership team, there's a story that's already in place, right? And that story, people are very eager to tell their story and have the leaders understand it. And one of the first things that we do after we get to know each other and sort of create the vulnerability in the room is to put that timeline together. And we have a lot of fun in saying, let's just take this company's timeline as far back as we can remember, and let's everybody put Post-its up here and talk about all the critical events that got us to this day today. And what that does is it starts to tee up a conversation about what's working and not working. And when you get to the end of the day, you start to realize you've got a list of things that really work well, and you've got a healthy list of things that came out that are your barriers to success. And when you take a room full of finance people, followed by a room full of commercial, followed by the executive team, operations, et cetera, and you start to look at where the common ground is, you realize there are 3 to 5 things in that business where if you work on those together and you knock those down, you now have a culture and an alignment opportunity that is a step above where you really started. And you can actually accomplish that in 30 to 60 days. And the alignment begins. Everybody's understanding what they're looking at. They're looking at it through a common lens. You've created a safe environment in the process. And now you can start to put together that strategic plan that everybody's working on while you're going up the stairs to the lighthouse and getting out of the day-to-day. Hope that makes sense. And Julie,
Yeah,
do you want to add anything?
Oh, yeah. You know what is, and the thing about it is, in this new leader transition or onboarding, the timeline is so important because every company has themes. It might be as soon as things start going south, they get a new president. And then it starts going south and they get a new president. And you're like, oh, okay, wait, what's going on here? And then as a picture that timeline with all those stickies going across, new systems, no programs, new whatever. And what's fun is imagine a wall full of these stickies. There's always a big space somewhere, right, Carrie? There's always like, we were doing a bunch of stuff here, new products, new systems, nothing for 5 years. And then something else happens. And, you can even ask questions about, all right, IT, where have you had IT investment over this time? One of the things we run into many times is that companies keep putting duct tape on their systems because they're going to be too much to fix or change or do a whole new one. And they just keep needing more money, which means they haven't invested in it and so on. But that tells the story to the new CEO or president on day one. And what I love about it too is the other questions I ask, I would have Carrie leave the room and I would say, okay, what do we know about Carrie? What don't we know, but we want to know? And what issues do we have or what concerns do we have about Carrie being our leader at this time? And so I have the conversation with them. Carrie has a list of questions that says, what are my goals and objectives? How do I see myself? Blah, blah, blah. He comes back in the room with all of his and they have all theirs hanging on the wall and we lay it out and he addresses every one of their questions right there and then.
That's good. Do you think that it's important when as you're evaluating existing leaders and the people that are making things happen, how important is it to expose, for example, the president, as you just said, to say, okay, the leaders of this company are part of this conversation too, and they also have to change. How important is it for the people at the lower levels to see that, hey, we're not the only ones that are being asked to make changes?
The basis of any team or of any relationship is trust. Trust comes from vulnerability. When a leader says, okay, I hear you, you're concerned about this, or you think that, you're asking me questions like, oh, how long are you going to stay? Whatever. When the leader asks those questions, they're being very vulnerable, which allows the team to trust them.
Right.
And so the leader is listening and feeding back to the team what he's hearing about what they need, because people are addicted to choice. And the more they can put their choices up there on what they want, and the more the leader responds to that and incorporates them into their plan, the better it works.
That makes perfect sense. When you're evaluating the existing leaders of the company, when you come in to transform a company, what is the difference or what are the different things you look for when you're evaluating the existing leaders versus recruiting the new leaders?
Here's an interesting take on that. And I've shared this with a number of colleagues and other CEOs. I'm always intrigued by how many hours somebody works. I'm going to make a bold statement here. I'm never impressed by the quantity of hours that somebody works in the business. I'm impressed by the quality of the hours. If I meet a leader who can demonstrate tremendous breakthrough results, and then I ask them the question, hey, what do you do outside of work? And they go, oh my gosh, I am an avid golfer. My wife and I garden together. We travel every weekend. We love to do this. We love to do that. I have so many things outside of work. That's where I'm really impressed, because it means that person has probably surrounded themselves with a top-notch team. And there's a difference in working in the business or working on the business. And those leaders who have a great work-life balance, they're getting killer results. They're in a really good spot just from a health and psychological standpoint. Those are folks that have really figured it out, that I surround myself with great leaders. I don't have to work 15-hour days to get this done. And oftentimes when I'm recruiting or meeting a new leader that is going to report to me for the first time, that's one of the things I'm really trying to get at. And anybody who's ever interviewed in front of me knows that I will ask in the interview, tell me what you do outside of work, because I want to really find out, is there a balance there?
Do you have a life after work, or are you just,
yeah, exactly,
constantly at work?
It's all about balance. It's back to, am I balancing my strength with my competencies and my kindness? Am I balancing that? Because sometimes you come in with a stronger competence or strength than you do with kindness because it's needed in that situation, right? So you're always looking for well-balanced people. One of the other things that we look at, especially with folks that are already sitting at the table, how do they solve problems? So there's 4 kinds of problems. There's simple, complicated, complex, complicated. Now,
Okay, explain.
yeah. So simple problems are basically every time they see something, they rearrange the deck chairs. So it doesn't matter what the problem is. Let's reorganize, or let's fire somebody, or let's do, you know what I mean? That's a very simple decision that doesn't, okay, is that the right way to go? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. And then there's complicated. I need to think about how my department interacts with the other one. See, I have to consider a couple things. And then complex. This is where the Rubik's Cube comes in. I've got to be able to turn that cube with other people. I've got to be able to advocate for my position, but I also need to inquire on what else is going on for you guys. That is complex. And then you get to the folks at the highest level of that. And those are the kinds of folks that you need when you're implementing the overall lean system or any production system. You've got to be looking at the complex, complicated. So if you've got somebody on your team that's just constantly, well, let's assign so-and-so to this, or let's do this. Okay, well, there's probably a job. There's a seat on the bus for that kind of problem solver, but not at the leadership table. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, that makes sense.
And so you have people that are lovely people, and they know they have a competence in some aspect of the organization, but at a leader level, you've got to be able to go after the complex, complicated issues.
I had a question for you guys about the obstacles you might have to overcome when you're building these high-performing teams, but I want to ask the question a little bit different way because you guys have worked together for so long. I'm wondering if you could give an example, and you don't have to name who the company is. Maybe an example of a project that you guys worked on, a company that you helped, where maybe there were some interesting obstacles that you had to overcome. Can you think of one of your projects that you could just give us kind of a case study of how your transformation toolbox worked?
Wow, Julie, that's a loaded question because we've had challenges in every single one.
Right.
So what are some that really stand out to you that you really learned from? And you can take it back down to a general if you want, if you don't want to give it an example.
No, I'll start with one.
Okay.
Is recognizing that you've got the wrong people on the wrong seat on the bus, and on the leadership team bus, if you will. One of the biggest issues that I run in with leaders is they don't pull the trigger fast enough. They know this person needs to be off the team, and they hold on to it. And then there's all kinds of stuff. And there's all these reasons why they don't have that person leave the bus and get a better person on the bus. And for whatever number of reasons, a lot of times it's political savvy, but still it's like, oh my gosh, everybody knows so-and-so needs to go. And so I like to encourage folks that once you know that this person isn't the right person here, let's find them a good job. There's probably a better job in the organization for them, or if not, then in another organization, because a leader will spend more time babysitting a poor leader than they do running their company.
Interesting.
That was good. Julie nailed it right there. And it's actually the exact same example I was thinking of. But let me just give you a little twist on this. And this is going to bring it from an 80-20 perspective. If you were to go into your closet and every time you wear something, put it backwards on the hanger, okay? And do that for a month, 2 months, but just every time you pick something, put it backwards. And it's okay to pick the same thing that's on the hanger backwards if you want to wear it again. But if you do that, studies show that you pick the same 20% of your wardrobe all the time, and you leave 80% of it hanging most of the time.
Interesting.
Okay. Yep.
Really?
You have your go-to jeans, you have your go-to sweatpants, your go-to shirts, and that's
Absolutely.
the way it works. So why do you keep that other 80% of your clothes hanging in the closet, right?
Well, and what's the answer? Is it just comfort zone or?
So that becomes the question in business. This is a real world example. You've got an engineering leader who invented one of your best selling products that made a fortune in the 70s and was on its path to oblivion over the course of maybe the next 10 years through the 80s. And by the time you take the business over, that person is on the payroll. They're making a lot of money. They're contributing very, very little to the business whatsoever. But they've been in the closet for so long. How do you possibly move them out of the closet? right? And
Yeah.
oftentimes leaders find it easier to walk around the problem than to face it and to realize how transformative it can be to face up to the issue and move through it. That's one of the things I think over the years, as Julie has worked in my businesses, she's really scanned the companies for what we call incompetence. And we don't mean that derogatory. We mean, are you in the wrong seat on the bus and have you been that way for a long time? But everybody's walking past you on the bus because they don't want to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a real problem in organizations. I can challenge any leader who's listening to this today. If they have a real honest conversation with themselves, they know who those people are.
Would you guys say that the people part of building high performance teams in a high performance company, is it the most critical part? Can you have, for example, a manufacturing facility that's making widgets of some sort and that process is great and it's going through and the product is high quality and it's getting done in a good amount of time and they're selling things and so they're profitable, but it's still a bad, struggling company because of the people? Is that possible?
Oh, absolutely. From my experience, you can typically distill many problems down to a lack of performance, alignment, understanding, leadership as a root cause of why things aren't moving forward.
Absolutely. And part of my job, if I'm partnering with leaders in there, is to go to them and be very direct and tell them what the impact is of what's going on. That's a big part of my job as a partner, is to be very, very honest about what's happening and very clear about how anything that's going on is a reflection on the leader. So if there is poor behavior down in the ranks of the folks working there, that poor behavior is always represented on the leadership team. And it might be subtle, but it's always there.
Would you guys agree or say that culture is the number one problem with most struggling companies?
Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that
I've heard that before. Who said that, Julie?
That is the best quote I ever heard.
I've heard it too. I can't remember who said it, but yeah, that's a great one.
But you know what the interesting thing about it is? It does eat strategy for breakfast and people know that, but the problem is they don't know how to go after it. Because when you first start going after the culture and start saying, what can we do? Ugly things start showing up. And people need to learn how to storm, and they don't know how to storm. And so they don't have those skills to help them do that. So you've got to have the combination of teaching folks what the skills are and how to ask the questions and surface the issues, and then always do a what, so what, now what, or whatever process you're using. What are you going to do about this stuff? A lot of times it takes one leader being asked to leave. And it's astounding what happens to the rest of the organization. All of a sudden people go, wait, what? I look at the measure of a leader is how they tolerate poor behavior. And any leader, like you said, is walking around it or ignoring it. That's the measure of that leader because they're demonstrating, oh, it's okay. It's okay to have these bad behaviors. I'll tell you what, if there's bad behaviors in that organization that's getting stuff done, but they've got a lack of people stuff going on, they're not paying attention. And it's not because they're bad people. They don't know how, because it means that you have to take time and you have to have consistency and constancy of purpose around building your culture. But people start backing off because it gets messy and then they don't know what to do, which is why they just need somebody to help them. And that's for people like myself. That's my role. I'm here. I can help you. I know what to do here. And then I'll partner with you. And then we can go after these big issues.
That makes perfect sense. And just to piggyback off that, because that was really profound what you just said, Julie, I want to ask Carrie, on this particular podcast, I talk a lot about the future of manufacturing. I talk about different innovations that are happening. I talk about the industrial Internet of Things. I talk about drones and augmented reality and this sort of thing. But how important is culture to the future of manufacturing?
That's quite a question. And again, you could probably fill a whole podcast or two just on that topic alone. And it's a topic that a lot of us at my level deal with now because there's a difference in the way, say, I was brought up as a baby boomer and how millennials now relate to the work world in this day and age. And so it really comes and always comes back down to communication. Understanding from your own employees what puts them in that spot when they walk in that door on Monday morning where they're at their best. Physically, mentally, like they're ready to go. They understand what we're doing. They're glad to be a part of it. They have the tools they need, and they're getting all the feedback that they expect. If you talk to somebody that, say, is where I am in my career and where my mentors were, obviously, if you look back at teachers, I mean, these were, children of World War II veterans, if you will. We were brought up in a little bit different way than the generation who are just entering the work world now, who are so technologically savvy, who believe communication through text messages and electronics is the way to do it. They want to move faster. They want to be exposed to more technological opportunities. And so putting them in that great place culturally is different than others. And you have to really understand it. But what I want you to hear in all this, it still comes down to exactly what Julie just said in the triangle. You and me, or the communication, and do we understand the task and the work that we're doing? And are we constantly on a very healthy basis communicating on that?
The biggest thing any kind of change brings into a company, I mean, even when you're trying to implement 80-20 or lean manufacturing, the first thing that shows up every time is fear. And the antidote to fear is faith. Can you have faith in your company? Can you have faith in your leader? Can you have faith in your supervisor? Can you have faith in your team? Can you have faith in yourself? Where the fear shows up are the folks that don't have the faith in themselves that they can hold a job in this day. What do they need to do? And that's where you're looking at the individual conversations that you're saying. Here's how I see you being part of the future. Here's what you need to do. You can still run into people going, well, I'm not going to get on that computer. Well, good luck, brother, if you're not. You know what I mean? There's a price of admission to be part of a company. There's a price of admission, and you need to continue moving forward. But the job of the leaders is to evoke that followership, because people will have faith that, okay, if I partner with you on this, it doesn't mean my job goes away. It means that we're going to figure out, what else can we do to continue the level of profitability and increase that as we go forward.
Julie, I don't want to get to the end of this podcast without asking you about your talent management 9-block process. You sent me, has all these little pictures on it, and I really want to understand what this is. Do you think you could explain this for us without being able to actually see it?
Without visual controls, I can do this.
Great. I'm really excited to hear about this.
All right. Well, so the first thing is we just need a conversation tool so that I can emphasize that what you do and how you do it are both going to be considered as you're doing your job. Okay. So remember, I want to balance what you're doing and what you're getting done with how you're doing it, what behaviors you're demonstrating to get it done. We're going to assess that. So I want y'all to picture a 9-block. And up the left side is how well I'm doing my work, low to high. And across the top with an arrow to the right is how well I'm demonstrating the behaviors we've agreed on, whatever they are, whether it's integrity, professionalism, whatever it is. Now, if I look at this 9-block, if I point right to the middle of this 9-block and go, I'm doing my job most of the time. I'm doing it pretty well. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And by the way, I'm demonstrating pretty good behaviors. I'm respectful, I'm kind, whatever that is. Now I'm smack in the middle. Now imagine you've got your pencil smack in the middle. Now we're going to talk about a certain person. Let's say his name is Joe. Okay. Joe, not only does he do his work, but he's always looking around and going, you know what else we could do? We can improve this by going this way and all that. And do you see how he would start bumping up into the next box up above him? So now he'd be on the top row with that. And he might even not just be about respect for himself, but this guy is an advocate for, look, he's the one that throws the flag when there's a diversity issue. Like somebody tells a joke that really should not be in the room. Boom, this person's there. So this person would move to the top right box. And by gosh, we need to pay those people the most money. Okay. Now, the issue that I don't know how many times Carrie and I have run into this, and in any company, the issue is, now start in the middle of the 9-block, there are people who get, oh my gosh, they're the best sales dude ever. Boom, you put them all the way up to the top. I mean, this guy's making, oh my gosh, bringing in the sales. Now, this person is mean and rude and goes around the processes. He goes down and jumps in the line down on the shop floor and goes, hey, build this way, change this. And he's mean to everybody. Now, this person is in the top left. Now, Jack Welch at GE, now they did theirs on a 2x2. I like 9 because it makes a better conversation. He would say, these people are a cancer to your company. And they're a cancer to your company because let's say they're a sales guy, they go in and throw it into the next department, to do some engineering or whatever. But he treats them terribly. Pretty soon, if the top leadership is tolerating this behavior, guess who leaves the company? The best people. I have never seen a situation where the company does not pay the piper for carrying a cancer in the company. As soon as you identify this person, you have this conversation about, brother, you want to be over here in what I'll call the quadrant, which is doing above their job or doing their job with all the right behaviors. You want to be in those 4 boxes. Well, you talk to this person about it and you're very clear about what this person needs. And you can do a 30, 60, 90-day performance improvement, whatever that is. But this usually causes this person to come up short. Like, wait, I'm the hero around here. Actually, you're not. You are costing this company so much time and energy to babysit you and to help people recover from the way you've treated them. This goes back to when folks see you get rid of the abuser, they will have more faith in you as a leader. So 9 blocks, it's nice to have a little picture here. And of course, you don't show anybody else's, but imagine that you have a leadership team and everybody's got somebody's name on a sticky and they come in and go, because, you want people to be assessed or looked at. I don't mean in a mean way assessed, looked at across the company because we're looking for the best performers so we can promote them. Somebody brings in the name of Joe and goes, I see Joe being, man, he's in the top here. He does this and this. And then somebody says, well, I have to tell you, at the sales meeting, he got up and told the most horrible sexist joke in front of everybody. And then other people in the room are like, wait, what? What happened? And so you're really talking honestly. Now imagine what a great team that is that could talk honestly about the people that they have and give feedback to each other. Do you see how they're turning the Rubik's Cube together?
Right. Interesting. That sounds like a great tool. And I guess you come in and maybe because you're on the outside and you're not part of the company, does that help to kind of manage that 9 block
I just
period?
facilitate those conversations. And then typically HR has something like that. But what it hasn't been is a collaborative conversation. So like I told you, everything I use is so simple. The triangle, the lighthouse, the Rubik's Cube. This is just a very simple tool to have a conversation about what's going on. Heck, you could talk to your teenager about how well they're doing, what you've asked them to do around the house and how are their behaviors. And I think a lot of people find a teenager in the top left. They might be doing, cleaning their room, but their attitude and their behaviors are terrible. So you have a conversation about that.
Gotcha.
So it works for everything.
Wonderful. That's cool. Carrie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, not only do we use the 9 block, we've actually programmed it into our HR information system so that when employees, when their performance review is completed, it literally puts them into a 9 block in the organization immediately. So we know where our employees are in the 9 block at all time. And what's nice about that, it also helps us say, okay, here's a group of people who need more attention in helping them do better in their jobs. And we'll spend more time on training with the group. It also shows us the people who are excelling so well, we got to give them more to do and we've got to find more opportunities because they're about to outgrow their position. So it's a very good decision-making tool, and it really starts to take the subjectivity out of where you stand in your human resources.
And you guys are talking about putting everybody in the organization. I mean, everybody from the top leaders to, everybody, people on the shop floor, the people in HR, the people in all assets of the organization fall into somewhere on this 9 block.
They do.
Absolutely. Yes. And I want to give you this as an example of I share the tool and get people thinking this way. And then a leader like Carrie partnered with his HR person, will put this system in place so that it is operationalized. So it's not just the Julie Schell show.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? And so that's what I look for, because I only work with people I want to work with. And I can show people tools and they're like, yeah, that's nice. And then they don't do anything. Well, fine. I'm not working with you. But looking at this as an example of, can you operationalize what we talked about, tells me that somebody really gets it.
And hey, it's probably important too to point out the organization has to have very good goal setting and very good alignment to those goals. The 9 block is only fair if you can go to employees and they can look you in the eye and say, I really do understand what is expected of me. It's been communicated to me and I understand how my performance will be measured. That then makes the 9 block have a lot of integrity and be a very realistic tool. Because if it has a whole bunch of subjectivity, then the effectiveness of it isn't very good.
Well, and that's part of the leadership development. Imagine a process model for each one of their folks. Do I know what my output is? And then the job of any leader, manager, supervisor is to make sure that somebody has the right equipment. Do they have the right information? Do they have the right tools? Do they have the processes, procedures? Are they documented? Do they have the training? Are they being held accountable? It's the job of every leader to provide the inputs to the output that you want. In order for that person to get that output, they've got to have the inputs, and that's on the leader. So this 9 block conversation happens between the leader and the employee, saying and asking the question, what do you need from me? What do you need from me? What do you need from the organization to help you be excellent every day?
So we're kind of at the end of our time that we had. And as you both said, we could probably have full podcasts on every topic that we covered. But my takeaway is that culture is certainly important to transforming struggling companies, but it's also important to established companies. Culture may be one of the most important things we need to think about as we move into the future of manufacturing. But I want to give you guys the last word. So I'll start with Carrie and then Julie follow behind. I just want to know if there's anything else you want to tell us, so maybe something we didn't cover, or just what else can you tell us about the people side of helping these struggling companies make a transformation like this?
Look, if I were to leave people with just a couple thoughts, and I'm really speaking to those who lead others, ask yourself the question, how much time do I have to spend making up for poor performance in my business? Does everyone know the plan? Do you and leaders that are reporting to you, do they have a healthy following? And are you measuring it? And the only way you really know is if you're measuring it through some kind of a 360 mechanism. And then the last thing is to really contemplate this statement. It's not about you. Because you lead the business, it's not about you. It's about the people in the business and how well they can do their job and how they feel about working there because of the culture you provide. Leadership sets culture. And if you're the leader, that's what your main job is.
That's why you wrote the book, Carrie. Or that's why you're writing the book. Okay, Julie, what are your final thoughts?
Well, Carrie said it really well. You know, the people side of the business is 80%. Imagine a world that the success of every single person on your team is as important as yours. Imagine a leadership team at the top of the lighthouse turning a Rubik's Cube together. Imagine that everybody in the leadership positions has the skills they need to create that safe environment and for their folks to manage conflict and resolve issues. Imagine an entire organization that's aligned with true north of the company. Imagine what your profitability would be compared to where you are now. And the good news is you can have that. The only question is, will you invest the time and energy to prioritize this and make it happen?
That's fantastic. That's a great way to end this podcast. I want to really thank both of you for being here. Thanks so much for giving us your time and expertise. It's been amazing.
You're welcome.
I just want to give our listeners a really exciting first look into Carrie's new book, which I'm so excited about. He is writing it at the recommendation of quite a few peers in the industry, and it's underway. It has a target release time of sometime toward the end of the third quarter of 2021. So we're going to hold you to that, Carrie. It includes the process for turning around a struggling business, which is surprisingly pragmatic. Just like coaching a winning sports team, it starts with the execution of very basic yet essential fundamentals with my favorite phrase, boring consistency. Once that is mastered and you earn the right to grow, there are very specific value creation levers that can be pulled to unlock value relatively quickly. In private equity, we are working against the clock, and shareholders get paid 7 times to 10 times for every dollar of value created. This book will help you cut through the complexity and get right to where the value is hidden quickly. That is the key to winning in the PE world. So we are really looking forward to that book, and I'll give you more details as it gets closer. This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.